Unit 4, Lesson number 3, Philippine Constitutions. So under this lesson, we will try to discuss about the evolution of constitution, of course, coming from the Philippines. So every country has its own history of its constitution. And of course, there's no permanent thing in this world, so that is why some constitutions may evolve from the previous constitution. And furthermore, we will try to define and explain what is the meaning and what is the purpose of creating a constitution, and what is the role of constitution for a certain state or for a certain nation, and what does it gives to the nation, what is the importance of constitution as we move along under this lesson. So first of all, we need to define what is constitution before moving on the evolution of constitution. So here we have the definition here of constitution, and when we say definition, some constitution may be different from each other. However, they have a commonality, not only here in the Philippines, but together with the different countries who are practicing, or for the different countries who have governments wherein they're practicing their own powers and authority based on their own constitution. So what is constitution now? Of course, based on our definition here, the Constitution refers to the body of rules and maxims in accordance with which the powers of sovereignty are habitually exercised. So, meaning of that, I made it very simple on what is the definition of Constitution. Of course, it is a body of rules. When I say body of rules, these are the laws that we need to follow. So, remember, in order for us to maintain peace and order in our own society, we need rules and regulations, and we need laws, because through the use of law, or through the use of these rules and regulations, some of our rights are being limited. Diba? Kasi if you're not going to limit the rights of everyone, what will happen there is there will be an anarchy that may happen in our society. Remember na lang, if you have given the people unlimited rights, unlimited freedom, they may do whatever they want to do, even though they would commit a crime, ano pa. So, they could do whatever they do, 'di ba? Kasi nga, they know that there is no law that would punish or penalize the crimes that they may have been doing. Diba? So therefore, when you say peace and order here, the main basis of peace and order is through the creation of laws and rules and regulations. Without laws, without rules and regulations, there is no peace and order. So yan nga, and that is one of the definition of constitution. And furthermore, when you say constitution here, sabi dito on the second line of the definition is the powers of sovereignty are habitually exercised. So what do we mean by that? Meaning of that, the power of the government, or the authority of the government to practice its power to implement the rules and regulations that I have discussed a while back is based on the Constitution. Meaning of that, it is a written law. Hindi ibig sabihin that sa pagsabi ng government, I would try to implement these laws without any basis, and therefore that is nothing, or that is illegal, in other words, di ba? So therefore, when I say constitution, it is now the Bible of the government on why they are practicing and how they are practicing their own power and authority over the people. The constitution gives the right for the government to have its power, as simple as that. Okay? Because without a constitution, a government can never implement rules and regulations. Kasi nga, those rules and regulations being practiced by the government is based from the constitution. Okay? So, yaan ang constitution natin. Now, let's move on the different purposes of constitution. So here, first one, when you say constitution, or the first purpose here of constitution, it is to prescribe the permanent framework of a system of a government. So meaning of that one, since na sinasabi ko nga kanina, the main basis here of the government to implement the rules and regulations throughout the country or throughout the nation over the people, it must has constitution, and this constitution will now specify what are the following guidelines to be practiced by the government. Meaning of that, hindi lang, okay, so there are some conditions that the government must follow based or in accordance with the constitution. Like for example, there are three inherent powers of the government, known as the power of eminent domain, the police power, and then the power to tax. So, unahin natin yung una, the power of eminent domain. So, what is that power? It is the power of the government to take private properties for public use with just compensation. So, meaning of that, of the eminent domain, ang government daw natin could take private properties. However, there are some conditions. Diba? Pwede daw mag-take ng property si government. However, may condition tayo. So, there are three elements there of eminent domain. First one, yung property na kukunin niya is, of course, a private property. Why do we need that it must be private property? Of course, if that is a public land, that is owned by the government. So, hindi na mapapractice yung eminent domain. So, first one, it must be a private property. And secondly, the private property, kaya daw binibili ni government, yung isang private property is to use that private property as a public use. Meaning, siguro, yung private property na yan ay gagawing kalsada so that the public would try to use, di ba? Third element of the eminent domain. Third condition, I mean. So, third condition there is, pag nakapasa ka na sa private property, it is the private property is for the use of the public. And however, if you're going to take, if the government will take your own private property, kailangan niyang magbayad sa'yo ng isang just compensation. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, those three conditions must only be practiced by the government. Okay? As for the practice of the eminent domain. Hindi mo pwedeng practicein ang power of eminent domain kung wala yung three conditions na yan. So, that is one example of the purpose of Constitution. We try to create a system. We try to, of course, to put guidelines. Kasi nga, we all know that government is somewhat powerful if it is not well defined. The powers and authority of the government is not well defined. Paano pag sinabi ni Constitution that the government has the power to take private properties, di ba? Pag yun lang, and then lagot na tayo. 'Di ba? Kawawa na tayong private individuals. Kung gusto ni government na kunin ng isang private property without any conditions, wala na, 'di ba? So what I'm telling here is that is one of the main purpose of constitution is to create a system. Okay, another example aside from eminent domain, the power to tax, 'di ba? So we all know that the power to tax is an inherent power of the government. However, there are some conditions then in the power to tax. So the government has the power to tax in order for the government to operate. Kasi nga we all know that the tax being collected by the government is the lifeblood of the government. Meaning of that, the government cannot function without the use of funds. So, saan kukuha si government ng funds natin? It will come from our own taxes. However, even though the government collects taxes coming from its own people, the fund must be used for the public. Okay? So that is another condition on the power of the government to tax. Hindi ibig sabihin na even though the government has the power to tax, the fund being collected coming from the people will be distributed with the politicians. Di ba? Hindi lang. All of the funds must be used for the public. However, alam naman natin that we have some officials that are corrupt, 'di ba? Kaya nga meron tayong graft and corruption ng mga cases. So what I'm telling here is, even though that the government has the power to tax, may condition din yan. Hindi pwede na kung saan sa lang igastos ni government ang pera niya. It must be for the public. Pero nagkakaproblema lang tayo in terms of corruption. Kasi nga, nasasayang yung funds being collected coming from the people by these officials or mga elected man sila or appointed man sila. So, those are one of the examples of or purpose of the government. So, meron pang police power but I will not anymore expound on that one. So, number two, it is to assign to the several departments their respective power and duties. So, sabi ko nga kanina, it is not only to specify or to guide the government or to give conditions sa mga authority ng government for for the government to practice its power. It is also to define or to create different departments for them to practice their own functions. Kasi nga, different departments have their own different function. Very good example of that one is our own Philippine government, di ba? Obviously, our Philippine government is divided into three branches, di ba? Known as the executive, legislative, and then judiciary. Wherein the executive is responsible for executing the laws. From the word itself, executive or execute, it is the main power is to implement the laws or the laws of maybe a legislature created by the Congress. And then under this executive branch we have, of course, we have the president, the vice president as well, and then we have the departmental cabinets, known as yung mga departments natin, mga secretaries natin. Like for example, DOH, Department of Health, DPWH, Department of Public Works and Highways, DOLE, di ba, Department of Labor and Employment, at madami pa tayo. So those are under uh, executive branch. So yun yung mga under ng executive branch. And different departments have their own respective functions. Okay? So, yan yung mga departments yan. And then letter C would be to establish certain principles on which the government is founded. So, ibig sabihin yan, kailangan ng isang government na magkaroon. Got for number two, of course, we have the executive, which main power is to execute or implement the laws. And then, of course, for legislative, from the word itself, to legislate, they are the Congress, and they're also known as the House of Representatives or the House of the Senate. And their own main function here as legislative branch of the government is, of course, to create laws, to modify, to repeal. When you say repeal, pwede siyang baguhin or pwede siyang bawiin, or even to create laws. Some of the laws being created by the legislative branch is known as yung mga Republic Acts natin. So, kung saan nanggaling yung batas, it depends kung saan nanggaling. Like for example, if the bill was created coming from the Congress, it's known as Republic Acts. However, if the bill naman was or came from the president, is also known as the executive order or presidential decree. So it depends whether the bill was created on the Congress or by the president itself. And of course, the judiciary here, it pertains now about the mediator among all. Of course, they have their power to, they have the checks and balances. For judiciary naman, they are our Supreme Court, and they are the ones responsible whether the things that we have been doing or the Congress, the legislative branch, on what are they doing, whether it is constitutional, because sometimes yung ating mga lawmakers natin are creating rules and regulations. However, those laws being created by the government are against the Constitution. So, yun yung magme-mediate naman. Here comes the judiciary branch that will check whether the law that has been passed by the Congress, whether the Congress or the President, if it is constitutional or unconstitutional. Kasi nga, remember, constitution is known as the supreme law of the land. When I say the supreme law of the land, meaning of that is, all of the rules and regulations, lahat ng ginagawa dapat ng gobyerno together with the people must not go against the constitution. Meaning, if the constitution gives us the right to speech, so hindi pwede na you are going to turn off all the media. 'Di ba? Kasi nga, we have the right to speech. 'Di ba? So, yun ang aking ibig sabihin in terms of these departments have their own specified functions and then duties. that they need to comply under Constitution. That's how powerful Constitution is. Parang ito yung main Bible, or it is the main Bible of the government, together with the people who are the residents or the constituents of a certain nation. Okay, so number three here is to establish certain first principles on which the government is founded. Okay, so what do we mean when we say first principles? So meaning of niyan is these are the most prioritized laws or principles to be practiced by the government together with the nation itself or with the state itself. Kasi nga, sabi natin, Constitution is the supreme law. From the word itself, supreme, so ang nakalagay sa Constitution natin must be the highest law of the land. So, they are known as the first principles. Sinabi ko nga kanina, wala dapat secondary laws or local laws to be created by the government of a certain nation that will go against the Constitution. Kasi that is a big no-no or that is now illegal. Remember, para siyang, yun nga, if you are Catholic, of course, you have the Bible. If you are Muslim, you have the Quran, di ba? So, we have our own principles that we need to practice. And all of the actions that we do must be based on the Bible that we are using. If, of course, we are a religious person. So, I'm just making that one for analogy. Di ba? So, of course, another here of the Constitution, another purpose here of the Constitution is the one that created the government. Okay? Because Constitution could exist without the government. However, a government can never be existed or it can never exist without the Constitution. So, kahit saan man pumunta kang parte ng mundo, kung may isang gobyerno ng isang bansa, and of course, may Constitution din sila. However, some of the countries, especially in the Middle East, they have their own constitution, but for some reasons, maybe because of cultural difference, and some of which are terrorism, some of the politicians who are handling the government do not follow their own constitution. Kaya nagkakaroon ng civil war sa isang bansa. Meaning, the government is abusing its power or it is using its authority and power without in the accordance of constitution. Meaning, the president or the government officials are above the constitution. And that is not a legal basis for a government to practice its power. Kasi nga, lahat dapat ng power and authority of the government together with the government officials will only be based on the Constitution. Kasi nga, sabi ko nga kanina, Constitution may exist even without the government. However, the government can never exist if there is no Constitution. So, ibig sabihin, kung walang Constitution or the government is above the Constitution, that is not a government na. Okay? That is not known as a government. Kasi a government can only be created with the use of constitution. So, kaya sabi ko nga, nagkakaroon tayo ng civil wars because of those examples, especially sa Middle East natin. Okay? An unconstitutional act is not a law. Diba? It confers no rights, it imposes no duties, it affords no protection, it creates no office, it is inoperative as if it had not been passed at all. So, nasabi ko kanina, walang government, walang office, there would be no rights, ano pa, there would be no protection and any other things in a certain nation without a constitution. It all boils down with the constitution. That is how important constitution to be practiced by a certain nation. Dito tayo nagtatry to get our own rights, to get our own government. That is because of the constitution that we have. Okay, so let's move on the evolution of the Philippine Constitution. So, of course, we have six constitutions that were introduced to us with our own Philippine history. So, ang gagawin natin dito, we will only try to review those constitution. Of course, it all starts from the Malolos Constitution, or also known as the 1899 Constitution. After that one, we have the 1935 Constitution, known as the Commonwealth. So after the 1935, we have the 1943 Constitution, known as the Japanese occupation. And after that one, we have the 1973 Constitution during the Marcos administration. And then nagkaroon din tayo ng 1896 Constitution, ay 1986 Constitution, known as the Freedom Constitution, or it is the transitional constitution before we started practicing or implementing the 1987 Constitution. Okay, so all in all, we have six. However, coming from those six constitutions that were introduced in the Philippines, there were only three constitutions that were implemented, fully implemented here in the Philippines, known as the 1935 Constitution, we have the 1973 Constitution, and then the 1987 Constitution. Okay, so now let's move on the very first start of the evolution. Of course, it all started coming from the Malolos Constitution, or also known as the 1899 Constitution. Kasi na-create siya obviously during the year of 1899. So before we move on the salient features of 1899 Constitution or Malolos Constitution, let's try to review what happened or why is it that Malolos Constitution was created and who created the Malolos Constitution. So, of course, we all know that based from our own Philippine history, that we were colonized by the Spaniards for almost 333 years. Diba? And until such time, by the year 1898, there was a pact or a truce between the Spain and the Filipinos, or also known as yung Katipunan natin. Of course, we all know that KKK or Katipunan was created by Bonifacio during the 1892, and some of the conspiracy theories that have been created, that Aguinaldo was the one who executed Bonifacio, okay, regardless of the KKK whatsoever. Now let's move on the latter part of the KKK. And we all know that KKK is somewhat a Philippine government created by Bonifacio, but it was now being ruled, or it is the president now during the time was Emilio Aguinaldo. So during the 1898, there were talks now between the Spain and then uh, the Philippine government or the Katipunan together with Emilio Aguinaldo to make a peace pact. So they have agreed that there will be peace between Spain and then the Philippines. And then the Spain would tell that they would like to give freedom for 3 years for the Philippines, in exchange that Emilio Aguinaldo, together with his men, will surrender to Spain. So, that is known as the Pact of Biak na Bato. So, nangyari dyan, so they have agreed. So, ang mangyayari, mag-surrender daw si Emilio Aguinaldo. Together, he will be exiled in Hong Kong. In exchange, the Spain will give monetary assistance or finances to Emilio Aguinaldo. So, ang nangyari, they have agreed. And Emilio Aguinaldo went to Hong Kong. However, the main problem there between the Pact of Biak na Bato, they are actually, there is a trust issues between Emilio Aguinaldo and we have the government of Spain. So they do not trust each other, even though they have agreed on a certain agreement or condition. Of course, the agreement was never been an agreement. Kasi ang nangyari dyan, the main purpose there of Aguinaldo for agreeing is he only wanted the money. Because the money, they lack funds during that time. The Katipunan lack funds. He needs money in order to buy more weapons for the Katipunan, in order to fight against the Spaniards. So, yun ang main purpose ni Aguinaldo. And main purpose then of the Spain for making agreement with Aguinaldo is they would like Aguinaldo to go down or to surrender in order to colonize the Philippines. So, they have their own hidden agenda between that agreement. So, that agreement was never been agreement. Okay? So, nangyari dyan, nagkaroon ng war, 'di ba? So between Spain, obviously there is a war between Spain before Aguinaldo pa. So on June 12, 1898, bumalik si Aguinaldo or Aguinaldo returned here in the Philippines by June 12, 1898, because he knew that Spain was selling the Philippines to the Americans. So when Aguinaldo went back here in the Philippines, he declared on June 12, 1898, the Philippine independence, and Filipinos are very happy. However, that is a short-lived independence. Kasi nga, the Philippines was sold now with the Treaty of Paris. Yes, was sold to America. So Spain sold the Philippines for $20 million in for America. Okay? So ganyan ang nangyari. So of course after that one, nagalit si Aguinaldo and he went back to the Philippines and declared the Philippine independence. And in September 15, 1898, Aguinaldo collected officials in Malolos, 'di ba? And that is known as the Malolos Congress. And that Malolos Congress is a body responsible for creating the Constitution of the First Republic of the Philippines. And that is now known as the Malolos Constitution. Okay, or also known as 1899 Constitution. And that Constitution was uh, took effect on January 1899. Kaya nga tinawag siya na 1899. Yan, January 20, 1899. However, this constitution was never been implemented. Kasi nga, there was now a war between the Philippines and US. Remember that Spain sold the Philippines to America. So that is why America now became the colonizer of Spain. And Philippines now is one of the colonies now of America. So nangyari dyan, of course, first thing that they did was to hunt down Emilio Aguinaldo. However, Emilio Aguinaldo was only captured in 1901 in Palanan, Isabela. Okay? So, of course, the Malolos Constitution is the one who created the first republic. However, this constitution was never been fully implemented because of the Philippine-American War during that time. So, now let's move on sa ating salient features of the Malolos Constitution. So, ano bang nakalagay sa Malolos Constitution na to? So, I will only be summarizing. I will not give the specified provisions under this Constitution. First one, the main purpose of Malolos Constitution is to create a government known as a popular representative government. So, when you say popular and representative, meaning of that popular, meaning of that is, you need to get the vote of the people. What is a popular vote? In other words, ha? Popular vote is wherein, example lang ha, meron tayong candidates for presidents. Let us say, candidate A, candidate B, and then letter C. Now, let us say there were, in total, there were 1 million Filipinos who voted. Okay, and that 1 million votes were subdivided with the three candidates. Let us say si candidate letter A got a 200,000 votes. Candidate letter B got a 300,000 votes, and candidate letter C got a 500,000 votes. So based on the popular vote, kung sino mang pinakamadaming votes among the candidates, it will become the winner for the position that he is running for. Like for example, sabi ko nga, if that is for presidency, and then through the use of popular vote, walang any, yung iba kasi, some of the constitution are requiring some of the percentage of the total votes. Yung iba kasi, they need majority daw. Meaning, kung majority vote naman yan, among all the three, kailangan nila, for you to win a certain position, on a certain position, if that is a majority vote, ang kailangan mo daw, if 1 million yung voters mo, you need to get 50% plus 1 of the total voters. Meaning, pag hindi nila nakuha ang at least 500,001 votes, hindi sila magiging president. So that is now the big difference between a majority vote and then a popular vote. For a popular vote, kung sinong pinakamataas na votes, siya ang nanalo. However, for majority vote naman, hindi ganoon ang case natin. The case there is who will get the majority vote. And what is majority vote? It is the 50% plus 1. So that is for popular government. When I say representative, meaning of that, the people is the one who will choose their own representative, and the main purpose of that representative in the government is to express or to represent, from the word itself, representative, to represent the will of the people. For example, here in Baguio City, we have Congressman Go. So Congressman Go is our own representative to the national government on which he will express our own will as the people of Baguio. Okay? So, yun ang ibig kong sabihin in terms of representative. Okay? Second, number two, a salient feature of Malolos Constitution. Number two here is we have, it is known as a unicameral legislator. So when you say unicameral, there are two types of bodies for legislative branch. Okay? Pero pwede tayong tawag na unicameral and then we have known as the bicameral. Pag sinabi natin unicameral, from the word itself uni, it pertains only on one body. So meaning, if it is a unicameral legislative body, iisa lang ang body natin who will create rules and regulations. And of course, if it is called as a bicameral, from the word itself bi, meaning two, meaning there are two bodies under the Congress. So, ngayon, sa Congress natin, ginatawag sa Congress natin for now, kasi we have the House of Representatives and then the House of the Senate, that is known as a bicameral because there are two bodies under one branch, di ba? However, noong 1899 Constitution, there was only one, and that is known as the Assembly or the National Assembly. So they are responsible for creating the rules and regulations. Okay, number three, meron na tayong separation of church and the state. Okay, so of course, when you say separation of the church and the church must not intervene to the implementation or to the function of the government. Together with the government must not intervene to the function of the church then. Kasi nga, Catholicism was a very big religion during that time. Almost all of the people are practicing Roman Catholicism. Hanggang ngayon nga, di ba? Wala ng Spaniards and it is over 100 years nang nakalipas when we were colonized by Spain. However, it is still part of our own daily lives to attend religions, di ba? And the number one religion here in the Philippines is we have the Roman Catholicism. Number four, when you say, number four, it creates Bill of Rights for the people. Remember, during the time of the Spaniards, during the time of the colonizers, we were not given the rights that we have supposed to have. Diba? Like for example, the right to freedom. Why? Because many of us are being deprived of our own freedom by the Spaniards. Kasi Spaniards are the ones who dictate our own rights and they're abusing their own power. So wala tayong privileges and rights during that time. So that is why when they have created the Malolos Constitution, it as well defined the Bill of Rights of the people. Okay? And last but not the least, we have the free education for the Filipinos. Okay? So those are the salient features of the Malolos Constitution. Maganda ang Malolos Constitution, however, it was never been implemented. Kasi nga, because of the US-Filipino War. And until such time that Aguinaldo was captured in Palanan, Isabela in 1901, wala na. So, ang nag-rule na from 1901 hanggang 1935, even in 1941, were Americans. Even though maganda naman ang kanilang intention noong 1935. So, that is the first constitution that we have, known as the Malolos Constitution. Okay? So after the 1899 Constitution or the Malolos Constitution, we have now the 1935 Constitution. So review lang natin. In 1901, Aguinaldo was captured by the American in Palanan, Isabela. So that is why Americans ruled the Philippines from 1901 or even in 1899 until 1946. Okay? So, hindi naman sa 1946, I think 1941 kasi nga in 1941, we have the Japanese occupation who colonized the Philippines as well. So, from the year 1901 to 1935, we were colonized or we were governed by the Americans. So, during that time, there is an act known as the Jones Act of 1916. And this act of